Sonic the Hedgehog games and pinball boards have an undeniable overlap of flashy arcade gimmicks and instantaneous audio feedback. Just about every element has been used as an asset in the games. Bumpers, flippers, those things that you pull back to launch the ball, yeah, those. So it's no surprise that they'd eventually design a full game based around the pinball theme, with some familiar playstyles to the Genesis games. It mainly involves manoeuvring Sonic around the courses and hazards, but hey, still more platforming than the unorthodox Mean Bean Machine, which, to correct my claims, Puyo Puyo was created by the Compile Corporation, not Sega, and they licensed their bean stacking gameplay to other games on different consoles too. Gosh, do I have egg on my face. The topic of this video, Sonic Spinball, is infamous for many reasons, like in all aspects a game could be. Conceptually, audibly, and for nightmare-inducing reasons. Why? Well, that's what I'm hoping to find out. So let's dive into Sonic's sole pinball game during the Genesis era. In 1992, upon the completion of Sonic 2 for the Mega Drive, Genesis in the West, everyone collectively heaved a sigh of relief. Sega finally got their official sequel to their new flagship franchise. Fans worldwide were happy and celebrated the new game, and the production team was finally freed from the exhaustion of having to meet crunch deadlines and the challenging conditions they had to work in. See my Sonic 2 vid for more details on that. The combined Japanese and American-based division, Sega Technical Institute, would, for any future Sonic titles they developed, split their team into two based on their speaking languages, and have them focus on separate games instead. Honestly, a good idea. As much of a miracle as Sonic 2 was after the fact, that experience in an already stressful industry is best not repeated, you get me? And so, as the Japanese side and some Americans would swiftly get to work on the next mainline Sonic game, a majority of Western peeps were tasked by Sega of America to fill the space in between releases with a spin-off game. Yeah, they really got the short end of the stick. The bright and flashy casino-themed levels from the first two Sonic games had the marketing team, chiefly developer Peter Morawiec, suggest they make an entire title dedicated to that style of gameplay. The main idea was merging Sonic with a pinball simulator like Pinball Dreams for the Amiga, which, looking back, certainly inspired much of Spinball's visual design in how it emulated the look and feel of arcade tables, loud noises and all. Flying in would be Katsuhiko Sato, along with other Japanese members, to help with production, as they needed all the help they could get, because Spinball needed to be coded, programmed and designed in a 9-month deadline to secure a holiday release schedule. Man, these guys could just not escape these tight time constraints. Head of composing the soundtrack was Howard Drossin, a frequent collaborator even into the modern Sonic era, and I'll get into the music of Spinball later. Don't worry, that gets its own segment. As an example of how tumultuous it was developing the Christmas Rushed game, because the title theme of Sonic 1 and 2 was technically a track owned by Dreams Come True, former songwriter Nakamura's band, the composers had to rush and replace the music on the title with another one. This track was completed in the last 2 hours, which truly astounds me. It's a wonder this game was shipped in a playable state. Sonic Spinball would come out first in the West in 1993 on the 23rd and 26th, for North America and Europe respectively, with a Japanese release date on the 10th the following month. Alongside Sonic CD and Sonic Chaos on their respective consoles, Sonic Spinball was part of Sega's Sonic 3 on 1 day release strategy, where all three of these titles would come out in the West on the exact same day. It truly was a goldmine for American Sonic fans, granted if you had a Mega Drive, Sega CD and Game Gear to play them on. The box art for Sonic Spinball has always stood out to me and continues to be one of my favourites. Greg Martin's impressive use of brush strokes, colours and the impression of speed to attract the eye are perhaps at their best here, and with only a few select colours for the palette too. I just love it. The Japanese cover, with the Sonic art drawn by Naoto Oshima, contains the usual bright colours and in-your-face freeform design, and a rolling Sonic with multicoloured after images adorning it. Whoa there, bucko, you haven't got all the Super Emeralds yet. Apparently this style of box art isn't universally enjoyed, but it's grown on me a little. I certainly appreciate the isometric shape of the Sonic Spinball title. Worth noting that the more mainstream cover art was corrected for the 8-bit ports, which I will cover also. And here, not only is Robotnik inexplicably given his Adventures of look from the cartoon, but Sonic's eyebrows are also less pronounced, giving him a slightly softer expression. I'd assume the reason is that the covers embrace their Western qualities, because this port was not released in Japan originally. That about summarises the development of this game. Let's take a look at the game's story and the vibes real quick. Can't expect the plot of a pinball game to have that much depth, but here we go. Dr. Robotnik is back at it with his world domination plots, having converted Mount Mobius into a polluting, ominous-looking stronghold, the Vejo Fortress. Vego? I'll stick with the former. This massive structure is powered by a whopping 16 Chaos Emeralds, which already doesn't add up because there's only meant to be 7 of the things, but I'll just assume that they are fake emeralds, perhaps? Obviously, such powerful things charging up the big f***you fortress has to be yanked out, and Sonic and Tails fly in via airplane to topple the base, but Sonic is shot off it and drops into the water. Sonic, no! Instead of drowning like a rock, as you'd expect to happen, he instead emerges right at the foot of the Doctor's fortress, and so begins the perilous, interesting, and often aggravating journey through the pinball defense system. The manual's words, not mine. From the chemical wastes of toxic caves, to the industrial-lit boilers of Lava Powerhouse, to the mass roboticizing plant, the Hedgehog encounters many bizarre yet creepy threats on his way up. Taking Chaos Emeralds out of their sockets does end up causing Mount Mobius to erupt, leading the Doctor to flee in a rocket ship, but Sonic is able to follow him into the sky and knock it out too. Tails catches Sonic in the nick of time, and Robotnik ends up falling to his supposed doom in the sinking volcano. Rest in piss. You doing alright, bud? I hope you're staying hydrated. And also, if you like these kinds of videos on my channel, it wouldn't hurt to like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate you. As I may have subconsciously hinted at, the game is hard as balls, but the really out there aesthetics make up for it a tad. You can really tell that a predominantly Western team designed the characters and locales, and that's not a dig in the slightest. I think I speak for many when I say the grisly vigils and sharp vibes are the most memorable thing about the game, be it on the more rebellious looking Hedgehog and his slight squash and stretch animation style, the oppressive and yet vibrant music and level assets, the unnerving enemy design. There's no other Sonic game that looks like this. But does it play like other Sonic games? Sonic Spinball can be considered a heavily expanded pinball section from the Genesis games. If it were harder to control and on crack, you get around by using flippers, the various assortment of bumpers, and little gates that whisk you away from one board to another. While you can just let Sonic roll around, pressing in directions does generally move you in that direction. You typically hit switches to progress forward or open gates, or phase through solid objects. What little platforming you do are in short, specific areas around pinball segments, either on foot or where you control yourself through the level's curious apparatuses. Jumping is also not the same as it is in the platforming games, as you don't keep your momentum when jumping, you just stop on the spot and do a little hop in the air. Every other button on the controller makes you jump, but when on the board, the left and right flippers are activated on a button, or you can use the one that does both at the same time, like a normal person. I mean, that's how I do it, unless I want to do a funny. Very funny they gave Sonic an idle animation, also, because you're less likely to stand still in this game than any other in this series' 16-bit library. I like how the spin dash sounds too. It's very unique, like you're strumming an electric guitar. If the controls are too slow for your liking, there is an option to make the gameplay go faster than usual if you're some kind of speed demon. It's probably an essential option for the naturally slower PAL releases. I mean, what? You can also play with up to 4 players during a session, which I certainly overlooked before, although it's handled similar to early Super Mario Bros. Games, in that you take turns and change over when the current player loses a life. You think if they had more time to develop the game, they'd change the Player 2 sprites to Tails, or the others to Sally and Bunny? I'm surprised no one's done that yet, but I'm getting ahead of myself. While wearing its inspiration on its sleeve, there's still Sonic elements in this pinball video game. Rings typically appear to add points to your score, getting extra lives, no longer viable from collecting 100 of them, that only occurs if you get 20 million points. Obstacles in this game either harmlessly knock you back, or administer a one-hit kill, like when you drop into a gutter, which, if you're like me, you'll end up in a lot. They may have polished the pinball physics as much as they could on the Mega Drive, but even nowadays I cannot quite grasp the physics of it, and there's no password saves or continues in this game, so if you lose all your lives, it's back to the title with you. Maybe I don't have enough years of experience under my belt, or perhaps that's just the joyful unpredictability of these sorts of games. Like, I was never quite good at that Mario one for the Game Boy Advance, but it's not going to stop me from picking up this game for a little thrill, and then die on the final level again. The aim of each stage is to navigate your way to the Chaos Emeralds, their number varied between levels, which opens the gate to the boss area. Whenever you collect one, Sonic floats up and winks towards the player, an ear-rendering melody ringing out. By now you've probably noticed the status strip at the top of the screen. It keeps track of the player's turn, how many lives you have, and your current score. I say that, but 50% of the time it notifies you of changes to the board to cheer you on through some of the more intense moments, whenever you get a safety net above the pit, things like that. It's unclear if it's just the HUD or Sonic talking to the player. I know only one Hedgehog who talks like that, or perhaps the yellow text is Tails? The colour changes often, but it's probably just for the player to read and not a diegetic way of hearing character dialogue. Smell my socks? Sniff? Lastly, well, there's no special stages because there's just as many Chaos Emeralds as rings in this fricking game. There are instead bonus stages available in between levels after beating a boss. On a technical level, I admire how these things look and play out. The perspective is more at an angle, and all of the board is in full view with a static camera, and there's even a reflection of Sonic in the window as he toggles with the flippers and watches the ball roll around. There are 4 different types of minigames, the first 3 being in between stages. First off, there's Trapped Alive, where you free Flickies and Sonic's Mobian buddies from ominous pink containers. Robotnik rides back and forth in his Eggmobile from Sonic 2 and needs to be knocked out to win. Worth noting that this is the only Sonic game to have cameos of the SAT-AM cast, here with their designs from the pilot episode. Everyone except Antoine is here. You know, this guy. The second bonus stage is Robo-Smile, where you knock the teeth out of this garish-looking head in Robotnik's likeness. There's also targets at the back, but they're just for gaining extra points. The March has a big Sonic 2 capsule with a whole army of scratches from the Adventures of cartoon. They form a barrier around the prison egg, and destroying it once again releases cameo characters. The fourth bonus stage is special in that it does not appear at the end of stages, but rather a bonus gate appears on a board after you collect all the rings of a stage. Entering it will lead to Clucker's Defense, a little pinball area where you face off against Badniks from Sonic 2. I've been playing it the whole time, but the music here isn't bad either. It's certainly, fun to narrate over. Speaking of which, I suppose it's high time I address the music and levels. Despite being rushed to completion, most of the soundtrack came out unscathed and is a serviceable delight to the ears, if you enjoy the Mega Drive's funky instruments, that is. I've already played the title and bonus theme music, but I'll go into detail of each of the stages and their respective themes. Toxic Caves is probably the most iconic stage, both for its music and how squicky and yet vibrant the level's aesthetics are. The purple and green contrast and a mix of organic yellow with machinery, the colour palette shifting away from a foreboding blue the more far away you are from the water below, the way everything has a poisonous green light on the underside, the organic teleporters which lick their lips after being used. Its scenery just pops, you know? Also, the rocks in the background kind of look like Sonic 2's Hidden Palace zone, which tracks because some of the same artists worked on Spinball. To say nothing of the music, second favourite tune in the game for me, it without a doubt uses the most tame instruments to make a properly upbeat tune. And yeah, the boss of this level is Scorpius, which I'll go into detail later. Don't you look at me like that. Lava Powerhouse has a much more industrial look to it, in comparison to the slimy and often organic aesthetic the previous stage went with. This power station runs on steam, either from the steam vents and lifts, or by a pair of kangaroos that can give Sonic a lift, named Hip and Hop. Which, fun fact, was the name given to them in the Archie Sonic adaptation, named after what the HUD says when they appear on screen. One of a handful of cases where the Archie Sonic stuff gets unexpectedly canon to the games. The colour palette is generally green and orange, with an unfriendly magma red backdrop, and the music certainly captures the atmosphere of entering a much harsher environment. It is personally my favourite track in the game, and has rightfully gotten remixed to hell and back by fans. The kangaroos help Sonic reach the boss of this stage, which is the row boiler. The machine is, well, the high-tech heart of the fortress and has whirling and minimalist background music with lots of sharp chords, not to mention a very simple name for what it is. Here you find floating platforms, halls of prison containers with animals that can be freed, and the Veggie machine, the closest thing to a roboticizer in these games. Flickies go in, badniks come out. Also, the tile set is based on the unused Cyber City or the SNES City Zone from Sonic 2, but I already mentioned that in a previous video. The final stage is Showdown, which is when the volcano is erupting and everyone's hightailing it out of there. Its music has definitely got the harshest chords out of all the levels, really hammering home how this is the final level and that you will burn your ass off if you dare make the slightest mistake. This area has a metallic construction site aesthetic, and I like that the sky transitions to a starry space background the higher up on the board you are. After getting the remaining Chaos Emeralds, you go and confront Dr. Robotnik in a final boss battle against his ship. That is, if you can bounce on the rockets and not get knocked off course. God damn it. And of course, I can't end this section without talking about the options music, heard both in the titular menu and during the credits and scoreboard. Renowned, ironically, for its harshly sharp chords, it's the go-to example for some to show the unpolished and jank aspects of the game. Although in the years since, its instrumentation has gained traction in a so bad it's good kind of way. I mean, Natalie Fordrain even did a fun little animatic to the music. The fanbase can be very creative. According to its composer, this track too was completed during the last moment of development, and because they were so rushed, he didn't get the chance to properly adjust the volumes and produce a more optimised tune. Poor guy has to live with this on his resume, but I do like Sonic the Hedgehog Boom, which contains some extended versions of Sonic CD and Sonic Spinball tracks. His stuff there is also good. So we've talked about the gameplay and music and whatnot. Let's go over the cast and the robots you face real quick. Our Blue Boy Sonic is the sole playable character in this title, his buddy Tails appearing only as the pilot for the glamorous cutscene mobile. His sprites are heavily based on American box art Sonic, one with the darker colours and his mohawk quills being more defined. Either that or they base him on his cartoon self, media of which the art team were clearly heavily influenced by. His animations, specifically made for this game, are neat, and I enjoy his cool little mannerisms. Dr. Robotnik, Eggman in Japan, makes several appearances in a bonus game and during the final stretch, though his laugh is heard when you get a game over. Compared to other games in the classic Sonic library, his appearance is much more outwardly grotesque, like a little toothy goblin. You'd first assume from the looks of the boss enemies and their gigantic grins and dark eyes that they're just like facsimiles of the Doctor and that he doesn't really look like that, but no, he really is just as ugly. The redesign, exclusive to this game, is more clearly seen in art from an unused cutscene, where his change in wardrobe kind of makes him resemble Satayem Robotnik now that I probably look at it. It's definitely more like spacesuit inspired. It's worth mentioning the big bad seems to perish in the collapsing fortress in the ending. I used to think that because they reused the metallic scream sound of the first boss, this might have just been a robot copy, but that's just a theory. Animals appear in this game whenever badniks are blown up, in some bonus stages, and throughout the machine level, flying off the screen once they are freed from their robotic prisons. To be exact, Flickies, Cuckies, Lockies, and an unnamed red bird are the only ones to appear. Badniks in this game, due to the pinball setup, usually go down in one hit, except in special situations. They have rather interesting designs this time around, certainly the most cartoonish and unsightly iteration of the villain's forces, but I'll go over them real quick in my usual bestiary fashion. Rexon, not to be confused with the dinosaur badnik from Sonic 2, slithers around in the watery area of toxic caves. It can make you lose a life instantly if you don't button mash after its head rises up. Going by its design and the scare chord that rings out, it might have terrified a generation of players. Magma worms bring their heads out of holes when you approach, requiring Sonic to wallop them a couple of times to proceed. Cluckbirds, often shortened to Cluck, are another Satayem cameo. They often act as a nuisance during pinball segments and appear to breathe fire or something. Scorpius is the first boss of the game and just sits on a platform and uses its tail to protect itself or drop acid from its stinger. This Robotnik-faced scorpion is notorious for its disturbing design and overlapping pain noises. Ferrons come in two colours but are virtually the same, and seem to be armed with a machete. They guard pathways and exits in Lava Powerhouse. The Roboiler is a giant boiler containing hideous Robotnik heads that spew fire when hit. The Roboheads don't have any countermeasures, but the steam emitted from the top of the thing can be a source of bother. Busters are humanoid badniks with flying hats. They will do their best to block your progress at the cost of their own lives. Frondors appear as guards of the machine's tubes and passageways. They don't do much, but I do dig its design. And lastly, Buzz Bombers, with their SATM look, appear as occasional obstacles in Showdown. And that's just about everything covered in the Mega Drive version of Sonic Spinball. Time to close this off by getting into the 8-bit ports. Okay, one more mention before I get on track. There are actually 3 separate versions of the original Sonic Spinball. You got the original, somewhat jank but doable, the European version, which had some bug fixes, but mostly extended some tracks and sped them up a tad, and the Japanese one, which was like the American release but with some sound effects replaced, like the jump sound and that saw blade sounding laughter when you lose a life, changed to an actual song. Sonic Spinball for the Mega Drive has been re-released in various packs for a variety of consoles, the biggest ones to note being Sonic Mega Collection, Sonic Gems Collection, the Wii's Virtual Console, Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, and the Switch with its Online Plus Expansion Pack membership. The 8-bit one. Okay, so handled by Sega Interactive this time. This port was released a year after the original for the Master System and Game Gear, and is, without question, the inferior version. The graphics took a hit, the game's soundtrack does not hold a candle to the Genesis original, and the gameplay is considerably more sluggish and unpolished due to the lesser hardware. Also, the ending cutscene was altered so that both Sonic and Eggman fall into the volcano and seemingly die. For real, like it goes from them falling in and the whole thing sinking, and then it just cuts to the credits immediately. Yeah, there were no survivors. Despite these cuts, all 4 stages and all the badniks were cleanly ported over, albeit in less enjoyable forms, and there are a couple of series staples added in for good measure, like item boxes. Also, join me in marvelling at the art they used to show your progression between stages. It would be bad art if this was used in the original. The bonus stages in this game harken back to the surreal look of special stages, this time being a couple of little pinball arenas where you have to hit all the things before progressing to the next area. They went pretty hard in some areas. Look at all the themes here. There's underwater, there's Egyptian, there's vaguely Eastern-ish, and Greek. And most bosses made it in too. The Roboheads, the Veggie Machine, and Robotnik's rocket ship in the final showdown, anyway. Scorpius was replaced with a floating, evil-looking head, which is just as unnerving, if not more so. The Egg Sleep Paralysis Demon. The Game Gear version, the one with a smaller screen size, got ported to later consoles too. Featured in Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut as an unlockable game for collecting 80 emblems, Sonic Gems Collection alongside the 16-bit version, and Sonic Origins Plus instead of the Mega Drive version. What is Sega's deal of not porting the more polished versions of these games? Is it legal reasons? Was this game considered too scary? Kids today can handle it. Just look at anything else on the internet. As for fan games, there unfortunately hasn't been any. What with this one's more complex programming and being limited to mostly pinball gameplay, the platforming ones are just easier to make ROM hacks of. However, I did find one, aptly named Sonic Spinball Slightly Better Edition. The ROM hack makes slight changes, such as adding more lives, adjustable physics and player control, and just generally making the game less of a hassle to play through. There was a loose adaptation of the game in episode 41 of Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, where instead of the Veggie Fortress, it's the Pinball Fortress. Sonic has company in the form of recurring side characters to bounce off of, both figuratively and literally. And instead of Scorpius, the big bad unleashes this giant boss scorpion with TV screens for eyes. Archie Comics also used the events of Sonic Spinball for issue number 6, and this was back in the goofy era of Archie Sonic, with quick quips and a wordy yet ultimately simple narrative. Still surprisingly accurate to the game though, and as I explained earlier, it introduced a couple of recurring characters carrying on after the original plot concluded. Most of the bosses would also appear in Sonic Super Digest issues, where Sonic and the gang face off against them in training simulations. It's remarkably interesting seeing people who grew up with the game referencing in an official comic book just how messed up those Robotnik face monstrosities were. Also fun to see the Veggie Machine get finished off in the most humorous way a Sonic Spinball boss has ever been defeated.
Let's go!
Generally, apart from its wonky gameplay, Sonic Spinball is primarily recognised for its more abrasive, eerie vibes. Whether it be the music or sound design, the visuals having a kind of creepy, uncanny edge to them, or the dark and grungy atmosphere that encapsulates the whole thing. Critics at the time were certainly unkind to Sonic Spinball, on all systems really, citing the unpolished controls and how progression through these giant pinball tables was more like a stroke of luck rather than skill. The game sold well enough, assuring its continued appearances in later consoles as a funky little bonus game. While it has connections to cartoons and other, outdated Sonic media, Sega themselves even acknowledge it, to an extent. And that's despite this game having, elements of old Sonic media that doesn't meet the franchise's current model and aesthetic. It was on and off, but eventually Spinball would be cemented as canon to the greater Sonic timeline, or as much of a timeline as you can make with these classic Sonic games. They're all very disconnected from each other. But with a place like Mount Mobius as its main setting, who knows what that might spell for classic Sonic's future? Come on, Sega, bring back them freedom fighters. A guy can dream. On the tier list, I suppose Sonic Spinball occupies the D. While I am nostalgic for its music, the overall game isn't quite to my liking. It's all my opinion, of course, as is everything on this list. I just simply prefer my pinball segments to have more platforming around them, thank you very much. In the next video, I shall be focusing on Sonic 3. About time, eh? It's the first Sonic game I ever played, and I'll be covering both that and Sonic & Knuckles, so I'm pretty excited about that. Thank you ever so much for watching, if indeed you still are, and I'll see you in the next video.
Big balls! Look at my balls! Giant swinging balls! It's me. Big balls! Very nice. Balls! It's Mark. Big balls! Big balls! Big balls! I've got balls. Very nice. Balls. Perfect. All my balls. I've got epic balls. Everything down here.
Squishy.